So today's Bloomberg Big Take looks at the crackdown on Russia and Vladimir Putin's financial isolation and what that signals to China's President Xi. China's annual parliamentary gathering, the National People's Congress, opens tomorrow, Saturday, in Beijing. George Magnus, Oxford University China Research Associate, joins us now. George, great to see you. How will China be viewing the situation in Ukraine and Vladimir Putin's actions? It was only a few days ago that Xi and Vladimir Putin were standing shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah, I mean, you know, we've just seen in the space of about 8 days, 30 or 40 years of post-World War II international relations history kind of go up in smoke. And this kind of standing shoulder to shoulder, this new era for international relations between Russia and China that was agreed with a big statement at the Beijing Olympics. I mean, that's only a month old, but that's gone up in smoke too, because of events. So I think the Chinese are, I don't think Xi Jinping is going to back away from Putin. But I think because it hasn't gone quite according to plan, I think the Chinese are probably feeling rather uncomfortable about the way things are. They obviously have a huge amount of leverage over Russia now, but I'm not sure that's a totally comfortable position for them to be in. And they will have noted obviously how the Europeans and the Americans have reacted unusually with cohesion and force.
George, it's Creedy in New York. You mentioned China is quite uncomfortable right now. Nothing quite like making you uncomfortable than talking about money. Talk to us a little bit about whether China can really insulate itself from that financial war that's really going on between the United States, Europe, and Russia right now.
To a degree, I think that China will be prepared to kind of go along with, I'm not sure, well, I was going to say go along with the sanctions. I think that there probably is going to be some sanction breaking because Russia, to all intents and purposes now, is a vassal state of China. And I think, Xi Jinping will want to help, his buddy out. But they have to be quite careful about this because the more that China is seen to be complicit with Putin in this kind of military adventurism, the greater is the likelihood, A, that the rest of the world, and certainly the United States and Europe, will push him further away. In other words, that will kind of exacerbate the decoupling process, and they'll try to kind of push China away, and that in turn is likely to will make China itself want to insulate itself, like they're seeing what's happening to Russia, and saying, we don't want to put up with that. We have to prepare for the day when they might do that to us, and we don't really want to, to succumb in the same way. So I don't really see any good options for China out of this. But the options that they do have really are to walk a very, very thin line between supporting Putin and trying to keep on side with the global economy and an openness which they depend on.
George, there's a couple of issues in there which I think are worth breaking out. First of all, let's just talk about that kind of support, that tacit support, that thin line that you talk about that China has to walk in its support of Russia. Where are the red lines for China? We've just seen overnight pictures of the Russian authorities, the Russian forces attacking a nuclear facility in Ukraine. Where are the red lines for China where they say, you know what, no, we're not prepared to support you on this? Are there any red lines?
Well, I suppose there is one somewhere. And it's a red line that probably is closely linked with the threat to use, nuclear weapons, for example. But short of that, I don't think, there's always been tension between Russia, or previously the Soviet Union, but Russia and China. And there is over Central Asia, over China's commercial interests in the Russian Far East, for example, over the Arctic. But I think that this kind of coming together, this rapport, which basically follows closer, economic and trade integration in the last few years actually is really about geopolitics and about their common anti-US hegemony and anti-NATO kind of agenda. So, for Xi Jinping to ditch Putin or basically, walk away, I mean, that's a big stretch, I think, and I don't think he's willing to do that, even if he's privately kind of, as I said before, rather uncomfortable with the way things are going. But yeah, I mean, I don't think we should hold out any hope that there's going to be a split between the two that's obvious or even of great significance just yet.
Can we talk about the trade war for a second? I feel like in the kind of face of the COVID-19 pandemic and in the face, of course, this war between Russia and Ukraine, the trade war that was so prevalent a few years ago has kind of been put into the background. Do these tensions or does this alliance with Russia bring that back to the spotlight?
Oh, well, it could. I was going to say trade war is so old school nowadays, isn't it? I mean, there's so much has happened since then. I mean, and actually it's quite relevant in a way because there have been reports in the media during the last week about the Biden administration considering new 301, trade section 301 measures against China. I think what's changed really, to the extent that anything has, is a kind of a move away from this idea that tariffs can actually, putting tariffs on Chinese goods can actually achieve anything, apart from which most of them are already subject to tariffs anyway. And rather that there are kind of different sorts of sanctions imposed on companies, for example, the entity list, which is still growing its list of companies which American firms are not allowed to do business with or to underwrite. I think as I said before, if China is judged to be overly complicit and helpful to Putin in these trying times, then I think they do run the risk of being pushed further away through the exercise of further sanctions, which, as I said, may not be tariffs specifically, but they could be other measures to address the ability of American companies or maybe other companies to deal with Chinese firms if they breach certain regulations. Yeah.
George, what is China going to do as a result of what we've seen happening to Russia with its dollar-denominated assets?
Well, as I think everybody knows by now, the Chinese are trying to develop an alternative to SWIFT, which is the closed kind of house clearing system involving 11,000 banks, and which is kind of a tried and trusted system which makes global finance work. They have their own system. I mean, it does actually use the messaging system in SWIFT, so it's certainly not at a point of development, really, where the Chinese can actually develop their own system. And, of course, China is still very, very dollar-oriented and dollar-based, but they would obviously like to be in a position at some point in the future where they are not dependent on the dollar anymore and where the yuan is a much more prominent and widely used global currency. I mean, I think it's a kind of it's a dog that won't hunt in a way, because actually to be a global currency and to get more and more people to use your currency, you either have to run current account deficits or you have to have open capital flows out of the country. Neither of those things are going to happen in China at any point in the foreseeable future. So I think China's kind of pushing a kind of a boulder uphill with this, but they won't be put off for trying. And I think that we should probably expect further incremental progress.